only thing we have to fear is
in war,
fear itself.
There is no substitute for victory.
Let us never negotiate out of fear.
We stand undivided, forever united, fighting hand in hand for the liberty we've earned, for glory and honor, for our sons and daughters, ever mindful of the lessons we've learned. Let the torch of freedom burn.
Welcome to the intersection of faith and politics. This is WallBuilders Live with David Barton and Rick Green. Thank you for joining us today. Visit us at our websites, wallbuilderslive.com and wallbuilders.com. You're actually joining us in the middle of a three-part series, but don't worry, you can get the first part, the only one you've missed so far if you missed yesterday, right now on our website at wallbuilderslive.com. Just click on that little archive button in the top right. It'll pull up the last few months of programs, and you can grab yesterday's program and catch up with where we're going to be today. We're actually going to the ProFamily Legislators Conference. Great opportunity for pro-family reps and senators from around the nation to come together, sharpen each other's countenance, exchange ideas, and hear from great speakers on great topics. And one of those was David Barton speaking on Common Core. Yesterday, we heard the first part of that presentation. Today, we're going to pick up right where we left off yesterday. We won't have time to get the whole thing in today, so tomorrow we'll get the conclusion, and all three parts will be available on our website at wallbuilderslive.com. Let's pick up where we left off yesterday. Here's David Barton at the Pro-Family Legislators Conference speaking on Common Core.
There's a lot of stuff going on in this course. If you look now, you will not find Thomas Jefferson, you will not find Ben Franklin, you will not find John Adams, you will not find James Madison or John Hancock or Sam Adams. Founding fathers are gone, as are the major battles in the American Revolution. If you're looking for Lexington, if you're looking for Concord or Bunker Hill, if you're looking for Saratoga or Yorktown, gone. We don't cover that anymore. That's not part of our history. You go past that, you get into the era of Lincoln. No Lincoln-Douglas debates, no Emancipation Proclamation, no Gettysburg Address, no assassination of Lincoln. That whole aspect is gone. And as a matter of fact, Civil War is gone. Don't look for the commander of either the Confederate or the Union forces, because it's not there. And don't look for military battles, because we didn't have any in the Civil War. None of that occurred at all. You get past that, you get into World War II. There is no D-Day in World War II. There is no Battle of the Bulge, and there is no Battle of Midway. Those didn't exist. And while we're at it, since we don't teach military battles, you will not find General Eisenhower, you will not find General Patton, you will not find General MacArthur, you will not find Admiral Nimitz. None of those guys existed. As a matter of fact, while we're at it, you won't even find Hitler. And you will not find what happened in the Holocaust. That is no longer part of what we teach in AP, at least we don't test on in AP history, and test drives content, so that's all gone. All this stuff is gone. If you want to deal with civil rights, you can't do that. I mean, you look at civil rights, there is no MLK, there is no Rosa Parks, so don't worry about civil. None of that happened in history. We're not going to test our kids on that. They don't need to know this kind of stuff. It's interesting what we do include. What we do include is state, oh, and by the way, there is no economic stuff, no free market system, no small business, no middle class, no entrepreneurship. All of that is gone as well. What we do teach that is fairly interesting is that we do teach about the atomic bomb being dropped in Japan with this comment. This is what you're to teach students. You're to teach them the decision to drop the atomic bomb raised questions about American values. So we don't want you to know all this other stuff, but we want you to question American values. And the decision to, now, wait a minute, question American values, what will we be questioning here? Let me take you backwards for just a bit, do a little review of history here. World War II, do you know how many lives were lost as a direct result of World War II? Any ideas? The conservative estimate is 60 million. So 60 million people killed as a result of World War II. What you have is about 40 million is the conservative number over in the Pacific theater, Europe theater, and you have about 20, in the European theater, you have the Atlantic theater, you have about 20 million over in the Pacific theater. So what we have is 40 million over here, and we decide, you know, we're going to have to go right into Hitler's backyard to get this thing back. So D-Day comes, we start marching through all those European countries, freeing a country at a time as we go. We end up in Hitler's backyard. He commits suicide. Then we find out what happened with all the death camps, etc. And that was a very costly campaign in terms of American lives and Allied lives that it took to drive Hitler's forces out of Europe. So very costly for what we had to do in D-Day. Well, now that we've signed the treaty to end the war in Europe, we've still got the war in the Pacific. And we're going to have to do the same thing. We're going to have to go into Japan, and we're going to have to absolutely go and get Tojo out of there. There's no other way to do it because he's got too many resources. And so what happens is it's called Operation Deadfall. We finish over on D-Day. Now we turn to Operation Deadfall, and that says we're going to have to go into Japan to end this war. We've got to go right in their backyard to do it.
This is David Barton with another moment from America's history. Christians have always believed that the greatest life-changing experience available to any individual is a personal relationship with Jesus Christ, and the testimonies of numerous converts confirm the dramatic changes which often accompany salvation. One such testimony of change comes from founding father Noah Webster, who explained, "I was led by a spontaneous impulse to repentance, prayer, and entire submission and surrender of myself to my Maker and Redeemer. I now began to understand and relish many parts of the Scriptures which before appeared mysterious and unintelligible. In short, my view of the Scriptures, of religion, of the whole Christian scheme of salvation, and of God's moral government are very much changed. The power of God to change a life yielded to Him was just as evident at the time of the Founding Fathers as it still is today."
For more information on God's hand in American history, contact WallBuilders at 1-800-8-REBUILD.
Let the torch of freedom burn.
At that point, you start making estimates of what it's going to cost in the way of lives. And the Allied estimates for what it would cost in the way of lives, when they looked at the Allied predictions to invade Japan, they said, you know, from the Allied standpoint, we think it'll be somewhere between 1 and 4 million Allied lives that will be lost. There will be 500,000 of those lives that will be American lives if we have to invade Japan. And depending on how much the people resist once we get there, we predict 5 to 10 million Japanese lives will be lost. So it's going to cost anywhere from 4 to 15 million lives to be cost to end what's going on in the Pacific. At that point, Harry Truman said, that's easy. That's not a hard choice to make. So we dropped the 2 atomic bombs, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. As a result, 150,000 people die in those 2 locations as a direct result of the blast. Another 150,000 die as a result of the radiation. So we're talking a total of 300,000 lives lost by those 2 atomic bombs. Japan surrenders. That's the end of it. We've gone from up to 14 million lives down to 4 million lives, that range. Now looking at 300,000 lives, and that calls American values into question, saving potentially 13.5 million lives down to 3.5 million lives. That calls our values into question. Don't think so, but that's what we're told. So of the immediate deaths we had, the question about American values. Now, interesting thing about that is what happened after we did that. After having destroyed Japan, we went in and rebuilt Japan. We didn't have an obligation to do that. It is pretty striking that if you look at those cities today, they look real different from what they looked back then. We installed an economic system that caused them to be one of the most prosperous nations in the world, one of the most free nations in the world. I would say that's American values. It's not colonialism. We didn't keep anything for ourselves. We went in and poured into that nation after they had taken so much out of us. And see, that's not what you get in the A-push test. And as you go through the A-push test, what you will find is you won't find anything good about America. But if you hate America, you'll love this test. Because it's got all... See, in history, you're supposed to teach the good, the bad, and the ugly. What we teach now is the bad and the ugly, but not the good. We go in exactly the opposite direction, which is American... A book I did 2 years ago got attacked by professors because I dared suggest that America was different from other nations. You said American exceptionalism. There's nothing more wicked than American... No, guys, it is nice to be the only nation in the world that's had a constitution for 227 years. That's a pretty nice stability. It's nice, as Bob said, to have 4% of the world's population produce 25% of the world's GDP. It's nice to have poverty in America being higher than middle class in Europe. You know, those are things that you ought to be proud of. Not so. So this is what goes on with APUSH, and that's why I say that's the eighth problem with Common Core is the testing drives everything. And we're seeing a massive influx of kids getting out of public schools because of the bad stuff. Matter of fact, you know, in North Carolina now, there are more homeschool kids in North Carolina than there are private school kids. I mean, it is going through the roof in the way of growth because people are getting out of school. And they're thinking, oh, getting our kids out of schools, that'll save them from that bad content. No, not when the testing is not changed, because you'll still be stuck with the same content because you have to deal with what's on the test. So having said all that, Common Core, the way we would say it in Texas, we're trying to fix education, but it's like putting lipstick on a pig. It's not going to make any difference. You still got a pig. It's just got lipstick on it. It's not going to be anything fundamentally different from what it was. As a matter of fact, it'll be fundamentally worse. It is a proverbial dog chasing its tail. We'll get nowhere with this. Is supposed to raise the standards of education. It will not. Now, Abraham Lincoln has a great statement. Abraham Lincoln said this. He said, the philosophy of the schoolroom in one generation will be the philosophy of government in the next. That's the biggest problem with Common Core, is look at the doctrines we're putting in those kids now, and what does that mean our national leadership is going to look like in 20 years when these kids get out? We will so hate America. We will be convinced that every problem in the world is America's fault. That's why we got a president going across the world apologizing for America. We're so sorry for all the grief we've got this negative, and see, that's not a good way to rule America, because you give away all of its strength, you get rid of all of its military. The same thing we're going through now. You destroy its economy, you destroy its freedom and liberty. So we've got a whole new direction coming. This is where I want to take you backwards and remind you of what it used to be. Because when you look at the original philosophy of education in America, little history here, let's go back. The original philosophy of education had three objectives. These are the three things that we believed education was supposed to do, and this is the way we ran education in America. And by the way, I love the concept of what we did in America for 300 years, and that was the one-room schoolhouses. Because in the one-room schoolhouses, everything was designed around the kids. It was individuals. That's why you had a third grader and a seventh grader learning math at the same time in the school. How can you do that? Because you met every kid exactly where they were and you raised them to a higher level. Now we try to raise the group to a higher level, and we're stuck with this classroom concept instead of the individual concept, where you had the older kids helping teach the younger kids, and the teacher was very conversant in all the topics, and kids learned how to teach themselves. I mean, a whole different philosophy from what we have now. That's what worked, and that's where we got the education system we did. And one of the things I'll show you a little later, and you need to, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me go back to it. So three objectives. The first objective was to teach religion, morality, and knowledge. That was the first thing that we were to do. Now, second was to teach thinking skills. And the third objective of American education was to instill high expectations. Let me take the first one, religion, morality, and knowledge. Easy to prove that. As you come out on Sunday, those of you who go see the library, you see lots of documentation. But I'll take you back to the time that we've got the Constitution done. So 1789, the Constitution is done, and we have a fundamental question is how we're going to grow the United States. We've done some of this in the Land Ordinance in 1784 in the Continental Congress. They redid it in 1785 Land Ordinance.
This is David Barton with another moment from America's history. The teachings of God's Word are the best friend civil government has, because these teachings deal with the heart. Only by dealing with the heart can crime be prevented, for as Jesus explained in Matthew 5, all crime comes from the heart. Understanding this, Daniel Webster, the great defender of the Constitution, once declared, "The cultivation of the religious sentiment represses licentiousness. It inspires respect for law and order and gives strength to the whole social fabric. Whatever makes men good Christians makes them good citizens. Indeed, it is not the good Christians whom the police arrest for armed robbery, gang activity, or other such crimes." Understanding this, the Founding Fathers encouraged religious instruction, for as Daniel Webster so accurately noted, good Christians make good citizens.
For more information on God's hand in American history, contact WallBuilders at 1-800-8-REBUILD.
the question was, you've got the 13 colonies now, the 13 states. What do you do with the Ohio Territory? What do you do with the Northwest Territory? What do you do with the Southern Territory? We got people living down there. What if they want to become states in the United States? So they passed a provision called the Northwest Ordinance because it addressed initially the Northwest Territory. By the way, this is the provision that told you how to become a state in the United States. It was passed through the House of Representatives 17th of July, 1789. It was passed through the Senate the 3rd of August, and George Washington signed it into law the 7th of August, 1789. It is a federal law that in the law books today is still considered one of the 4 organic laws of the United States. No laws, state or federal, are allowed to violate those 4. And that's the Constitution, the Articles of Confederation, the Declaration, and the Northwest Ordinance. Those are organic laws. Everything's built on that. The Northwest Ordinance, interestingly enough, that is the provision that all these states came in under. There have actually been 37 states that came in under the provisions of the Northwest Ordinance. It was originally applied to the first 6 states. That was Ohio and Indiana and Illinois and Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota. Those 6 states came out of the Northwest Ordinance. But then they applied it to the Southern Territory. They applied it to the Missouri Territory. They applied it to all these other territories. So 37 states came in under the Northwest Ordinance. What's interesting is it says you get 40,000 in your territory, you set up a Republican form of government, here's the type of judicial system. It goes through and lays out everything. If you want to be part of the United States, here's what you got to do. Article 3 deals with education. Article 3 says religion, morality, and knowledge being necessary to good government and the happiness of mankind, schools and the means of education shall forever be encouraged. Now, this is the one time that the federal government did get involved in education because it's in a federal territory. They didn't get involved in the states because that wasn't their jurisdiction. But in the federal territory, they did. Same with marriage laws. Back at the beginning, they did not get involved with marriage laws at the state level, but they did in federal territories, which is why they banned bigamy and polygamy in Utah and Idaho and Wyoming, etc. State jurisdictions were real clear. So that's what it says on education. Religion, morality, and knowledge, that's necessary to good government and the happiness of mankind. So we're going to proliferate schools in these territories. That was the belief, that schools would teach religion, morality, and knowledge. So that was the first purpose of education. And again, to this day, you will find that even in states that came in, if you look at the Ohio Constitution, if you look at the Michigan Constitution, if you look at Nebraska, they've got that provision that religion, morality, and knowledge will be taught in the schools of their state. That's because that was part of the provisions for statehood. That's why so many state constitutions contain that phrase. Now, many of them have taken it out after the 1962-63 activist decision by the Supreme Court. A lot of states went back and rewrote their state constitutions. They conformed their state constitutions to judicial opinion rather than federal, in this case, organic federal law. But nonetheless, so that's the first part. So religion, morality, knowledge, that was what we believe schools should teach. The second thing was that we wanted to teach thinking skills. We did this in a couple of ways. One of the books we used for, a century and a half was this book, The Improvement of the Mind by Isaac Watts. Now, we worked on how to think. The way we also worked on how to think was this is an example. This is, and again, I'm sorry, part of the screen's cut off here. But the word here is forensic. It's forensics, 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 forensics. And you go down here, and there's 5 of these. And I will tell you that forensic in this term was a fairly new word to me. I watched enough TV and NCIS that I thought forensics was what you did with dead bodies after a crime happened. And in this case, it turns out that forensics is a Latin word that was derived in 1650, and it means to learn the art of public argumentation. Now, the way they did it, and let me show you the forensics, because this is a book done by Robert Treat Payne, but we have this from John Quincy Adams, and we have from John Hancock, and all these other guys. And these are the forensics they did. See this first forensic? It says, whether the conduct of the Patriots who destroyed the tea in Boston Harbor in 1773 is to be condemned. What the teacher would do is they'd walk in and say, here's the discussion we'll have today. What the Patriots did in 1773, throwing the tea overboard, is that an act we should condemn or praise? All right, you take condemn, you take praise. It doesn't matter what you believe. What you got to do is figure out how to beat the other guy in the argument, which means you have to think about what they're going to say. Listen to what they say. You know, the weakness of that is, and you go through and analyze the other guy's side. And so you have to go after it, and you have to do it extemporaneously. You don't get preparation time. You have to learn how to think. And then after you get done, you flip it. You go to the other side. Now you got to argue. Now I got to figure out what are my weaknesses. Okay, I got to emphasize the strength. And you learn how to think through every argument. Look at what, and none of these have rights and wrong answers because they were all for the purpose of learning how to think, identify strengths, identify weaknesses. Look at this one. I associate with no one. I employ no one who's not of my party in religion and politics. We could still debate that big time today. It says, is there less danger in believing too much or too little? This one. Is there more to be gained or lost by new translations of Scriptures for common use? By the way, this was the debate for 12-year-olds. This was a discussion that 12-year-olds were having at the time. This is a textbook for 12-year-old Americans. So we were teaching them how to think all the way through, and that was a big emphasis. That's the second thing we did. The third thing that we did, and by the way, another way we taught them how to think, let me use a specific teaching method for a moment. You're familiar with Proverbs 22:6. Most people probably recognize it instantly. Train up a child in the way he should go. When he's old, he won't depart from it. We say, you know, if you just get the kids in it when they're young, they won't leave it when they're old. That's not quite the right translation. If you go back and look in the original, and if you look in marginal translations of many Bibles, it does not say train up. It says catechize a child in the way he should go. Now, catechize is a specific teaching method. In other words, if you use this teaching method when you're training up a child, when he's old, he won't forget the content. Use this teaching method. Now, we don't use this teaching method today because teachers continue to say, oh, that's so boring. That's rote memorization. We've got to make it fun for the kids. Look how we use this catechism method. For example, here is a catechism on ancient history. Here is a catechism on agricultural chemistry. Here is a catechism on American law. A catechism on etymology, which is science and the study of insects. Here, I mean, we had catechisms on everything that went on. We used the question and answer method because that's what the Bible said to use. There's a catechism on astronomy, a catechism on the Constitution of the United States. See, we were into using catechisms because that's what gave you the greatest retention and it helped your thinking process. We don't want to do that today because that is not nearly as much fun as having, you know, useless games that kids don't learn anything out of.
Hey, this is Tim Barton with WallBuilders. And as you've had the opportunity to listen to WallBuilders Live, you've probably heard the wealth of information about our nation, about our spiritual heritage, about the religious liberties, about all the things that makes America exceptional. And you might be thinking, as incredible as this information is, I wish there was a way that I could get one of the WallBuilders guys to come to my area and share with my group, whether it be a church, whether it be a Christian school or public school or some political event or activity. If you're interested in having a WallBuilder speaker come to your area, you can get on our website at www.wallbuilders.com, and there's a tab for scheduling. And if you'll click on that tab, you'll notice there's a list of information from speakers' bios to events that are already going on, and there's a section where you can request an event to bring this information about who we are, where we came from, our religious liberties and freedoms. Go to the WallBuilders website and bring a speaker to your area.
Let the torch of freedom burn.
What we did by using catechisms is you were required to answer 6 questions. The questions that generally go around catechisms, you have to understand who, what, you have to understand when, you have to understand where, why, and how. That helps you think. If you can go through and identify that with all the stuff, and see, that's what we did with science, that's what we did with law, and that's what we did with history, and that's what we did with everything, catechism. So this is where learning occurred. We taught students how to think. The third thing that goes with it is that we had high expectations. Our friend Rabbi Daniel Lappin has a great explanation of this. I love Rabbi Lappin. I consider him my rabbi. I think every Christian needs a rabbi. Those of you that have been here before know that. I call Daniel on a regular basis. When I testified at the U.S. Senate on global warming, and I'm a global warming expert, so testified at the U.S. Senate, I called Daniel before I did so and said, hey, let me tell you where I'm going with this and see what you think. And so I went through it, and he says, okay, but remember Genesis 1 through 3, and he took me back through some logic on it. I go, God, that is so brilliant. And so I completely changed my testimony based on the logic that he showed me out of Genesis 1 through 3. So Daniel is really good in so many areas in thinking, but one of the things he points out is that the first time God spoke to humankind, he chose the Hebrew language. Now, he didn't have to do that. He could have revealed himself to people in any language, but he chose to reveal himself to the Hebrews. He spoke Hebrew to them. And so as Daniel puts out, that's not an accidental language. That's a language God chose to speak in, and God doesn't waste words. We're told in Matthew 12, Jesus says, every idle word you speak, you'll give account of. God's not into idle words. And as Daniel points out, he said it's significant what words appear and do not appear in Hebrew. For example, in Hebrew, you cannot say the word coincidence. The word coincidence does not exist. You can't say it. Why? Because it never crossed God's mind that anything was a coincidence. You know, He ordains, He plans, He works things to His end. Coincidence? There's no such thing as coincidence. God guides and directs. Another word you cannot say in Hebrew is the word retirement. Impossible to say that. There was never a time when God didn't want you to be productive. You don't get to quit being productive and retire. He wants you being productive. Another word you can't say in Hebrew is the word fair. That's one of the words I banned from my kids. I will not let them say the word fair. It doesn't matter what's fair in it. What happened to Jesus wasn't fair. What happened to Job wasn't fair. What happened to Joseph? God's not what's in the fair. He's what's in the just. What He's more concerned with is how you respond to what happens to you. How did Job respond to what happened to him? How did Joseph respond? How did Jesus respond? Fair it's irrelevant to God. That's not a word. And so you can't say that word in Hebrew. Another word you cannot say in Hebrew is the word adolescence. And this is where we get all goofed up in America today. We built a whole culture around adolescence. We were not trying to have people stay immature in the old days. You get out of immaturity as fast as you can. We want you to be an adult as soon as you can. When you're 13 years old, you should be an elder in a synagogue because you've already memorized the book of Deuteronomy, and you particularly know the schema, Deuteronomy 6 through 8.
We're out of time for today, folks. That was part 2 in a 3-part series from David Barton. It's a presentation he just gave a few weeks ago at the ProFamily Legislators Conference. Tomorrow we will get the conclusion, and you'll be able to take all 3 parts from WallBuildersLive.com and share them with your friends and family. So be sure and tune in tomorrow for the conclusion. You've been listening to WallBuilders Live.
We stand undivided, forever